For those of you that are new to this show, my whole angle is that I'm reading all the bills that passed the House of Representatives and letting you know what's in them. The bill we are going to discuss today is H.R. 5. This passed the House on July 19th and had to do with education. Now, one aspect of Race to the Top that would continue, that this bill would not dismantle, is a provision that lifts the caps on the number of charter schools that are allowed to exist. In fact, expanding charter schools is a clearly stated goal in H.R. 5. This is a quote. "It is the purpose of this subpart to provide financial assistance for the planning, program design, and initial implementation of charter schools, and expand the number of high-quality charter schools available to students across the nation," unquote. Now, charter schools are sort of public schools because they're funded by our taxpayer money. The difference is that they're exempt from a lot of education standards. Naomi Klein, the author of The Shock Doctrine, I've talked about her many times before, described them this way. Charter schools are, quote, publicly funded institutions run by private entities according to their own rules, unquote. Now, charter schools are allowed to create their own curriculums and are often not required to provide student services such as transportation and meals like the traditional public schools have to. Now, the funding for charter schools is determined state by state, but often the states fund charter schools by diverting money away from the traditional public school district where the new charter school is built. Now, charter schools are not allowed to charge tuition. They're not private schools. And they're not allowed to use the taxpayer money that they get to upgrade their facilities. But the thing about charter schools that makes them controversial, other than the fact that they are allowed to invent their own curriculums, is that unlike traditional public schools, there are avenues to make profits in the charter school system, because charter schools, whether or not they're started by a nonprofit, a university, or the government itself, these charter schools can be managed by for-profit corporations. Now, for my own personal opinions on this, I'm kind of torn on charter schools because the public school system is very regulated and every school does kind of have to be the same. So in the public school system nationally, if art funding is cut across the board, then every school is not going to be able to teach as much art and every school won't be able to teach as much music. And there are definitely people in this world that are not meant for college, but are meant for things like art and music. And, you know, there might be a good case for allowing some wiggle room in curriculums because some of these charter schools are excellent. Some of them are not. And so when it comes to the quality of charter schools, the debate rages on. There's no clear answer here. You know, when it comes to charter schools, this is a big gray area. It's not like deep water drilling in the middle of the ocean for oil. That's pretty black and white. You know, I can tell you that this is a bad thing to do. And if you argue with me, then I'll eat you alive. But with charter schools, it's just not that clear. But the problems with charter schools, in my mind, based on, you know, my issues with the privatization of the government, is that these schools are funded with our taxpayer money and some of that money gets diverted into the pockets of the people that are running these schools. I am also highly suspicious of the people that are promoting charter schools across this nation. If you go onto ALEC's website, we've talked about ALEC before. It's the American Legislative Exchange Council. And this is that group of corporations that sit down with state legislators and actually write the bills together. If you go to their website and you look at their model legislation, click on education, and it's all about charter schools. So these creepy corporations are definitely the ones that are pushing this charter school program. And I just don't trust them. They've given me no reason to trust them. So that brings me back to H.R. 5. Now, Title 3 of H.R. 5 was fascinating. The title of this section is Parental Engagement and Local Flexibility, but it's all about charter schools. Specifically, this title says that charter schools will get as much money as public schools. The states must pass a law giving charter schools money per student to be eligible for federal grants. And let's just take a second here and keep in mind that this entire bill wants to make sure that the federal government stays out of the state's business. Yet this part is telling the states that each state needs to pass a law giving charter schools money per student. So it's telling each state how they're going to fund these things. I find that crazy. The bill then says that there can be no limit on the number or percentage of schools in a district that are charter schools. It says, quote, that individuals directly involved in the operation of charter schools, unquote, need to be consulted by the state while the state is developing rules and regulations. Once again, the federal government here is telling the states how to do their business. Now, changing the typical structure of charter schools, this bill will also allow 15% of the funding to be used for charter school facilities. And that is kind of a scandal because that's like a part of the definition of charter schools, that our taxpayer money doesn't go towards their buildings and their pools and their sports facilities or anything like that. This would change that. This bill also says that public money can be used to attract private money for facilities, for property and construction. And if you think about that, by allowing a charter school to invest and have a lot more money to put into their facilities, that's another way of trying to take students out of the traditional public school system, because you'll have this public school that's now having money taken away from it. They're going to have to do a lot more with a lot less money. So that school's likely to be falling apart. And then right down the road is this brand new charter school whose teachers aren't in the public school union and has this beautiful facility and a brand new pool. And if you were a student, which school would you want to go to? The regular public school that can't fix the lights, or would you want to go to the brand new shiny school with the pool and the basketball court and all the fancy things? And when it comes to how our public money is used, the evaluations would be done on how the government distributes money to charter schools and not what the charter school does with our money. So clearly, a goal of this bill is to expand the charter school system. And another part of this bill makes that easier to overhaul entire education systems in districts, presumably so that they could become more charter school oriented. And it definitely aims to have this happen in richer neighborhoods. You see, right now, you can only overhaul your education system in a district that has over 40% of the students from low-income families. Why it's structured that way, I don't know. But that would open up this charter school thing to only low-income neighborhoods. Well, what this bill does is it takes away that requirement that most of the students be low income and just allows this educational overhaul to happen anywhere for really any reason. And it also says that any new programs that are adopted in these education system overhauls can be done by private for-profit businesses. So for instance, let's say that a state wants to change their entire education system. Instead of having people in the state government actually oversee that process, they could contract it out and some company could do that for a profit. It's like privatizing the function of government itself. Now, when it comes to judging how these charter schools are doing, this bill would lower the accountability standards by changing how the schools are judged. See, the data used to evaluate schools would only have to be, quote, evidence-based, unquote, instead of, as it is now, through, quote, scientifically based research, unquote. So in order to say that these charter schools are working, then you would just have to provide evidence that some students are learning. It doesn't have to be through a scientific study anymore that you get your data on which to judge the schools. Now, one of the things about this bill that really pissed off the Democrats and caused this bill to get not a single Democratic vote is the lowering of accountability standards and qualification standards for teachers. Now, they kind of pulled the same language thing with teachers, saying that the teachers need to be, quote, effective instead of, quote, highly qualified, as it is now in current law. And this happens over and over again throughout this bill. It also repeals any minimum qualifications that were set nationally for teachers. The bill then gives public money for training for teachers themselves, which is a good thing, but it's the way that it does it. First of all, it gives public money, so our taxpayer money, to set up teacher evaluation systems and then further teacher education in states. Good thing. I'm down with that. But then that process, the process and the classes themselves can be privatized. So you take this taxpayer money and some of it goes into somebody's pockets. And then this is kind of stunning. These schools that would be training and teaching the teachers can't be required to have degree-holding faculty. They can't have any restrictions on their infrastructure spending, and they don't have to be accredited. That means that, and it's not just that they don't have to be, the government cannot require that they have accreditation. So here you have your teachers that are teaching your students going to a school that doesn't have a faculty with college degrees. That's going to be just fine. Now, the reason I think they would do this is it would open up the door for a lot of these for-profit schools that have popped up all over the country. A lot of them don't have accreditation, and this would allow them to stay in business if they're able to train teachers without actually having to pay faculty with degrees and go through the process of getting accredited as a real school. Now, this next thing I'm going to talk about is the part that I don't really know if I understand what I was reading, just because what I saw is completely different from what people were saying on the floor of the House. See, this is the part of the bill that I actually thought was kind of good, because if you're going to have this charter school system, there are very real criticisms of it that, in my view, this bill seemed to take care of. For instance, I mentioned earlier in the show that charter schools generally don't have to provide transportation, so they don't have buses to bring the kids to school. And then for low-income students, a lot of times they don't have school lunch programs. And so this bill would provide public money for those charter schools to get those things. It would also provide public money for expanding charter school programs for kids with disabilities, and provided public money for programs for kids who need to learn English, although the administration of that, of course, could be privatized. Now, when I looked at the debate, because the way I did this particular bill is I read the entire bill without even looking at any of the rhetoric, because and I do that most of the time. I read the bill first and look at what they say about it later. And one of the things that the Democrats kept saying is that it guts education for kids with disabilities and guts educations for kids that need to learn English. And maybe I don't understand. Actually, I know I don't understand what the current law is about those things. So maybe, I don't know, maybe that's true, maybe it's not, I don't really know. But there is money in here for those things. So basically, I just have to conclude that I don't really know what the situation is when it comes to charter schools and kids with disabilities and kids who need to learn English. I don't really know if this is better or worse. But what I do know about this bill is that it definitely gives the profiteers, the private businesses that exist to make money, a much bigger role in state education policy. So how did this bill do? Well, like I said before, this bill passed with only Republican votes. There wasn't a single Democratic vote. And one of the reasons that they said over and over again that they didn't vote for this is because it cuts funding for education by about $1 billion. And I can't confirm if that's true or not, because I don't know what the funding currently is. So I can't tell you whether or not that's true, but it was quoted quite a few times on the floor of the House, so we'll just go with it. But what I found really amazing is that all of this stuff that I've just spent the last half hour describing to you, with the privatization of our public school system and with money going from the public school system into private schools and like all this stuff, it wasn't even mentioned on the floor as a factor in why Democrats weren't voting for this bill. It actually has me pretty concerned, but not terribly surprised, that the Democrats are okay with the privatization of our education system. Now, when it comes to essential government functions, I am not dead set that education is necessarily one of them. But there were certain things in this bill that definitely had me concerned, especially as a taxpayer, because there were a lot of different avenues there for taxpayer money to go into private pockets and not necessarily improve education. So I had concerns about this stuff, obviously, and our representatives didn't, and I was genuinely surprised by that. I thought for sure that at least a couple people would get up there and be like, by the way, these charter schools are run for profit, and these tutoring things, they're all done for profit. I thought someone would mention that, and they didn't. And the reason that's significant is because I just think that this is happening faster than the American people have been able to think about it and have a say in it, because these rules and regulations that we've put on our public school system, we've put there for a reason. So do we really want to have a parallel public school system that doesn't have to follow the rules, doesn't have unionized teachers, doesn't really have qualified teachers? They're now lowering the expectations of the teachers for our students. Do we really want to allow the management of our public school systems to be done for profit? So there's all these questions going on here, and it's being legislated and it's being expanded. And I, for one, feel like I was never consulted. But I guess it doesn't much matter, because this bill is doomed. It's not going to pass the Senate, and President Obama will not sign it. It's just not going to happen. So this isn't one we have to worry about. But it is worth knowing that this is the goal of the people who are running the House of Representatives.